me too is we're live. I need to
We're live?
Yep.
We're going?
We're going. We're on. Even though Twitch says that the title is invalid, try changing it a bit.
Oh, interesting.
Are they really?
I mean, they've been the social media platform that's the most aggressive at correcting behavior right now.
It looks like they will not let us say white privilege.
Okay.
So Twitch will not let us say white privilege.
Maybe just call it privilege.
Yeah, I just changed it to privilege on Twitch. So
perfect.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Where's Your Heart? We appreciate everybody who's chiming in. One of the things that we like to start off with is just our gratitude. So we are grateful for you for being one of the first 5, 6, now I see 17 people to start to chime in. All the traction that we're getting, or Where's Your Heart is getting, has been amazing. The feedback has been good. Just being able to hold the space for such a conversation has been amazing. So my name is Torian Richardson, if you don't know, and I have a wonderful, amazing, outstanding, smart co-host, my man Royce. How you feeling, bro?
All right, if you're gonna always introduce me like that, I gotta have a time when I get to introduce you like that.
I mean, whatever you want to say, man. You know, it's all good. It's all good.
Now I gotta live up to that. let's lower the bar, man.
It's all good, man. It's all good. So yeah, man. Just want to get started so we can kind of talk to some of the listeners. I know everyone is going to be excited about this show. The title, White Privilege. We're going to talk about white privilege. We have a great guest who's going to add to the conversation over time. So if you're interested in white privilege, regardless of what your stance is, what you think, make sure that you start a watch party right now, because
I'm trying to do that and I can't.
Yeah, this is it, man. This is game time. You know, this is it. This is the conversation that everybody wants to have, but we're having it, but we're actually having it in what I would say a more toxic space. So we just in our pre-show, we just articulated it as we're weaponizing in a lot of other spaces our emotions and our feelings, and that is something that we are not doing here on Where's Your Heart. Right? We're going to have rigorous debate. We're going to talk about things that matter to all of us. We're going to talk about how we feel, but it's not going to be in a way that is toxic and that is weaponizing those feelings. So that's our stance. And as we're championing vulnerability, that's it, man. So what you thinking?
Yeah, no, that's I think that's one of the most important aspects of what we're doing today is oh wow, okay, well, that's interesting.
White privilege is a myth. There we go. Oh, are we gonna jump right in? We'll get to that, bro, because we gotta start with gratitude. We gotta start with gratitude, because we will get to that comment, right? That white privilege is a myth. But starting in gratitude, because I believe in setting the stage no matter what. Of course, grateful to hold this space, grateful for all our listeners and viewers that we have right now. And this week, I was really grateful for people who just held me accountable. And I have one particular story. I have a group of brothers that I work out with called the F3 Nation. Specifically, it's F3 Naperville. I have a lot of brothers that are watching right now. The majority of them happen to be white, you know, just for sake of information, but it has nothing to do with that. I was actually supposed to wake up this morning and lead one of our workouts. I was supposed to lead the first yoga workout with a lot of the guys. And, I overslept a little bit, and and I ended up getting to the workout maybe about 25, 30 minutes late. Now, one wonderful thing about that is one, people did jab on me a little bit, and they held me accountable, but it was in a way in which people not only held me accountable, but they talked about how they appreciated the fact that I even showed up even when I was late. So, just being able to meet in that level, in that place of accountability, candor, or radical candor, as Kim Scott talks about in her book, which is a great book, by the way. I don't think we start endorsing things, but I do like her book. And and just being able to talk to each other and meet each other in that way. So I'm really grateful for the F3 brothers specifically today. And that's my level of accountability, man. That's how I'm showing up. How about you?
Yeah. I'm like you mentioned, I'm grateful for all the folks that are watching this, interacting with us over the week and on the show. We're still learning how to pop the comments up, and I'm looking forward to the time when a couple of weeks ago I was on Frontline Stereo podcast with TL, and he has people call right into the show, and it's so cool, and it's so fun to be able to have that, that extra dimension. So just so people know, we're talking about how to do this stuff and learning, and we're excited about that interaction aspect. And I'm grateful for you, like the way you show up all week long, and in our space that we create here. I don't know. I'm grateful for so many people right now. I'm grateful, for my spouse who like has the breadwinning job so that I get to do stuff like this. I mean, I also clean her toilet, so there's all right. There's a trade-off. But it's so there's a lot of that.
That's what's up, man. That's what's up.
Yeah.
So we had a long week.
Oh God.
Interesting week. For me, when I think about this past week, and what was interesting to me is I'm watching. So I watch a lot of different types of media, but I've also started limiting a lot of what I watch, like the duration in which I watch things. So what was interesting to me that I really started to pay attention to is how across a lot of the news outlets, a lot of the news channels, the narrative is shifting a little bit, right? There's a lot more toward, like, I've heard a lot of commentators who wouldn't acknowledge things like slavery still affecting how we show up today, or accountability in the Black community. I'm just trying to think of some of the things that I heard this week, but they were coming from people, places, and things that or weren't associated to those same things in the past. So it's almost like, as we're starting to become more uncomfortable as a society, specifically here in the United States, and the conversation is widening a little bit, I think almost everyone is calibrating their stance. I feel like people are calibrating their stance as it becomes closer to us really actually having some level of change and reform in our society. And I don't really care, which side or up or down that you're on. Across the board, I've kind of seen that. So it's interesting to me, because when I start to think about and I look at news cycles, how collective they are, how the same people are kind of used in different news outlets to reaffirm the same things. It's just interesting to me. And I'm reflecting on the week, and I'm going to pay attention to it going forward about how narratives are actually being calibrated and looking for consistency. I was watching one where they were talking about Don Lemon, who's a commentator on CNN, and he was talking about like accountability in the Black community and all these shootings that are actually happening. And this was like 5 or 6 years ago. And then I think last week or the past 10 days, he was very adamant about, Black Lives Matter is not all about all Black lives, which was interesting. So, and how he was trying to reaffirm his position and stuff like that. So what about you, man? What did you see this past week?
There were a couple articles on that I tried to engage, and I could not find the original recording. So anyway, but yeah, like the way sound bites are used out of that kind of stuff. That was part of where I stumbled on some of that. I was like, I'm just, I want to hear what a whole person is about on stuff like that, if not just a soundbite. So yeah, today was a friend that posted a link from like Science Today or something. It's one of those. It's not a peer-reviewed new science journal, I don't believe. I could be wrong. But it was looking at a brand new study that just was released, saying that it sounds like COVID affects sperm counts.
Never heard that one before.
Yeah, well, and it's like I said, I'm not sure that this study's been peer reviewed yet. This is not like to that level of like count on this science, but it was definitely for me this gut reaction of this fucking virus is attacking everything that's wrong with this country, and I'm kind of okay with it in some senses. like it's attacking us along the crack of race. It's attacking us along the lines of classism, and now it's going to out toxic masculinity because suddenly people who were hell no on masks, if this turns out to be a thing that goes viral, are going to be like, oh, give me that fucking mask. So there's that, and then there's just the like overwhelming statistics, right? Of like the gut check of more Americans have died in the last, March, April, May, June, half of July, 4.5 months from this fucking virus than died in the entirety of World War I.
I did not hear that.
That was, I should check that because it was something my wife and I were chatting about and she looked it up online. So I should double check that. But I believe the death toll for World War I was 129,000 US soldiers. And here we're at 136,000 and counting.
So I've heard a lot from the argument standpoint of, well, if we're testing more, of course, we're going to have more people. We're going to find out that more people have it and or have died from it. Like, how does that fit into what you're hearing?
So first off, not everyone is reporting the same. Even all states aren't reporting the same because we can't agree that fucking science matters. I mean, just to be blunt, if science doesn't matter, if facts don't matter, then we have a real problem. And the way we do it matters. So New Mexico, for example, one of the questions I have about our statistical report is, are the Navajo Nation folks who are within the bounds of New Mexico, because if I'm understand the outline of their land correctly, it also sprawls over into Arizona in some parts. So are they, how do we determine what part of their folks who are who have this or have died of this, what part of those go into the New Mexico pool of statistics? And I haven't seen any outlay from New Mexico. Now that's one that is pretty easy to spot. But then you also have just the basic question of, is there standardized testing in a state where right now, every time a dead body goes to the morgue, it's being tested for COVID? Because that again will skew that, right? So it's one thing to say we're underreporting or we're over-reporting or those kinds of things. What's more important is, how are we being clear about how we're reporting? That's what really matters. It's one thing, it's if, this is 3,000 deaths in this state. By the way, no, deathbed reporting is not mandatory, that kind of thing. At least disclose what information. But we can't even agree on that because science is not respected by a whole group of folks in this argument. And I just can't, like, what do you do with that?
Okay, so okay, I'm with you. I hear you, right? And I'm not going to dig into that one as much, but I'm going to go into your comments about science, though. So it ties into the topic for today, which is white privilege. Okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of the narrative that we've been hearing on one particular side is around white privilege, how that affects society. The main question is, does it really exist? Because if we can't even have a conversation around that, then it seems to me that everything beyond that takes away from the factual basis of whoever's taking their stance. If you fundamentally believe it doesn't exist, then it's hard to have a dialogue about it, and vice versa. So you and I've talked a lot about this. I know you have a lot that you want to talk about and that you want to share. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that because we have a lot of people that are chiming in. But we got a comment already, right? And I'm not sure. Lex the Penguin says white privilege is a myth. So can you take a few moments, tell us a little bit about your work? Because we haven't officially done this. So this is kind of the introduction to the world. Tell us a little bit about your work, and then we're gonna dive into this. We got a really good guest, friend of mine, brother of mine from Florida. We met well, we'll do an introduction later. We met a while ago. We stayed connected over a lot of travels and a lot of things happening. So it's going to be great for this conversation. But let's jump into it, man. White privilege. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Okay. Well, I mean, so first off, did we tell people to subscribe to this and do all that and go to the YouTube channel and do that?
No, you can do that. Sorry. I'm over here doing like engineering too.
So I know. All right.
Got it.
So check out Where's Your Heart 2020 on YouTube. That's our YouTube channel. Subscribe to that, please. And make sure that you've liked the page for Where's Your Heart Matter. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because off of that, today I'm going to put up some posts. The podcast that I've been working on is called Killing the Great White Male. And it's a personal project that is becoming a joint project with Torian, as we kind of have wrestled with this stuff. And now, like, I feel myself shifting in great ways because of our relationship. But when we talk about, so please check out also Killing the Great White Male on iTunes or on Facebook. Get hooked up with that because it's an incredibly complex conversation. And it starts with the term privilege. So what is privilege? Does that even exist? And to do that, we have to kind of, again, step into a question of, well, we are social animals. So when we talk about basic needs for many animals, we talk about food, water, and shelter. The challenge with humans is it's not just food, water, and shelter, because when you put us in isolation, we go fucking nuts. So, and that's well enough documented that if we can't agree on that, I don't know what conversation we can have.
Well, I think a lot of people are living it right now over the past 90 to 100 days. I mean, it's been very difficult for a lot of people, especially if there are things that aren't acknowledged in your life, in your work environment, in your relationships.
And mental health that's not taken seriously, and emotional needs that are right. Yeah, you're nailing it.
Yep.
So yeah, food, water, shelter, and meaningful social interaction. And that's a real challenge because the brain defines what meaningful social interaction is by its dopamine hits. For folks who like to critique people who stay in abusive relationships, their subconscious is getting dopamine hits off of interactions in that relationship still. That's why people stay, because we are deathly afraid of massive change at that level. Because when we leave people, even people that are abusive, our brain thinks food, water, shelter, and meaningful social interaction are all in danger because we've gotten dopamine hits off of them. That's a oversimplification, but that's kind of how the brain operates, right?
Okay.
So if we have that, social interaction is a vital part of who we are. And then you introduce the notion of privilege into that. And so how does a society organize itself really matters. Is it hierarchical? You know, do we look to leaders to do stuff, things like that?
Brandon said food, water, shelter, and a reason to matter.
Yeah, and you could definitely translate it that way. Like the meaning-making parts of our brain are huge. They are a massive, massive bit of that. I phrase it as social interaction. You could phrase it as reasons to matter. What do we look for when they're evaluating a newly discovered set of bones and the scene to decide whether it's part of us as humans or not? They look for things like music. They look for how they treat their dead. These are all meaning-making things. One of the folks I work with around brain stuff calls us meaning-making machines. So yeah, nailed it. So if that's the case, then you input the notion of privilege, and you have a bunch of shit
real quick though. So can you define privilege? What do you mean by privilege?
So privilege, let's just use a textbook definition of that. What the hell does textbook say on that?
Now, I'm a bit of the antagonist, right? I mean, we talk about this stuff all the time, but for the sake of the conversation and who we have on and how engaging this is going to be for a lot of our viewers, I want to make sure that we're kind of level setting with this. So we have a lot of people checking in. We have Becky saying hi. Janine Rogers talks about how white privilege is actually ingrained into the core of America and it's normalized. So that's why people deny that it actually exists.
It's the water that we swim in. Like there are folks that like we bump into all the time, people who are people of color, any number of different identities who don't believe that privilege exists, much less white privilege. We're just simply accustomed to it.
Right. So let me be clear before we get to the definition. So I actually do think that white privilege exists, just for the record, but people want to know where Torian stands. I do. I've lived it. I felt it. But I look at it very holistically in that I also think that there's a such thing like as male privilege, right? And so the way I articulate it to people is like we're born into this social system, the society that we're in right now. And so as a man, I'm born into the system. Now, I've benefited from male privilege, whether I've known it or not. It's something that has actually helped me get to certain levels personally and professionally, right? But it doesn't mean that I'm a misogynist, right? And so my question to people always is like, for me, as I've acknowledged and become more self-aware, like, you know what? I'm benefiting from being male in this situation, or whatever the case may be, that I actually acknowledge that. And then I take that into, how do I start to calibrate how Torian shows up, particularly when it comes to feminine energy, when it comes to dealing with women. And so that I'm creating as much as I possibly can, and not just being passive about it, but being overt about, how do I create a better environment for women?
Yeah.
So that's my definition of it. That's how I process it. But just for the record, I do believe that white privilege exists, particularly within the system, not necessarily within relationships and how we show up for each other, but it does start to become ingrained into our institutions. So sorry. Go ahead, bro. Go ahead.
No. So privilege is according to the Oxford Dictionary that I found on my app. Okay, so whatever kind of authority you grant that. A special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. There's more, but if that's a working definition of privilege, then so how do we examine that in our society, and how do we examine it from a number of different angles? So right now our title is white privilege. You mentioned male privilege. There's a number of different ways that perspectives that we can look at privilege from. And what we're talking about there, so we can come at it from a science end of things. Mortality rates for African Americans in this country, take the same disease, the same intensity of disease, the same location of disease, think cancer, right? Or heart disease. And you examine how many, what percentage of folks with that condition who are African-American, what percentage of them die of that and at what age? And you compare that to folks that we call white. Because, I mean, bluntly, also, let's be clear, white and black are fucking made up. You and I are not white and black.
Yes. Well, yes, but we have this conversation all the time. You're right. It's a social construct. Yeah.
Right. But it's a social construct. So C point A, we're social animals. So it matters. It ends up having very real impact. Yeah. So yeah, when we're doing these things, there are statistics that back up that this exists. Why do African-American folks seem to die at a higher rate? And why is that statistic played out again and again and again? Yep. Janine, one of the things that one of the statistics that I bring out constantly was a major study that I read, this was like 10, 15 years ago, that looked at who actually was committing crime versus who was getting arrested for crime versus who was getting convicted of crime, and then what kind of time they were doing for it. And all along the way, you can watch the bias shift more and more and more toward imprisoning people of color. Like,
so why is this such a big thing, or why are you so adamant about the study of this?
So okay, yeah, all right. Well, we gotta get to our guest too.
I'm very much looking forward to this conversation.
So here's the problem: is where we're at right now. All of these facts have been out and about for a long time. Facts mean nothing at this point, and so what ends up happening is exactly what you just mentioned. When we begin to encounter our privilege, what do we do with it? If you want to ignore facts, I don't know what kind of conversation I can even have. But if you want to look at something and say, it's hard for me to believe that I have privilege. Okay, that's a conversation I can have, because I remember that. I remember being that guy who was like, I can't possibly have privilege because I've been fucking poor. At the time when I had this conversation, I was on fucking food stamps. So for me to believe that I had privilege when I was working 6 jobs, still not really able to pay my bills in the Bay Area while I was going to grad school, it was hard for me to believe that I had privilege, right?
Right.
And so it took a lot of work to even see that I had, even in spite of the fact that I was disadvantaged or even oppressed, right, around issues of money, around class, that I still had immense privilege as a white male.
Okay.
And that my whiteness was not a matter of my ethnicity, because I wasn't, like, part of my dad's family I always talk about, they were Azorian, which, what are they? I don't know, but they came through the indentured.
I don't even know what that is.
It's a colony of Portugal out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay.
But these people came through the indentured servants as indentured servants in the cane fields of Hawaii.
Okay.
Right. So you've got that weird part of my family, and I call it the Thanksgiving flan problem, that my white friends didn't know what the hell flan was. So part of me was always like, and all my friends from that are Latino or Hispanic or Chicano, like they knew what flan was. I live in New Mexico now. Everybody's got flan. I love it. So I think that's like a big part of the issue there, is that, like you said, having privilege doesn't mean that you are a misogynist.
Right.
And at this point, we are also coming to an understanding as a nation. We had it with the Me Too movement, and now we're seeing it with the Black Lives movement, that simply not saying the N-word as a white guy is not sufficient.
I agree with that.
It's insufficient. It's insufficient for me to not be racist. I have to be anti-racist in this setting. Like, that's where we are at.
Yeah, I mean, when I try to personalize that to me, when I talk about gender, like, for me, that is important, in that I have to advocate for, that means being active, being aware for women when I'm in environments where I feel like there's level of suppression, oppression, and I've been in rooms, right? I've been in locker rooms, I've been in business rooms where certain things are said. And if that's the critical point to me, when I'm just using it from a gender standpoint, if there isn't a woman in the room and I find that there's something to be structurally wrong, I have to be courageously vulnerable enough to address that. And in some situations, to be quite candid with you, early on particularly, I did not. But where I am right now in my own growth process in life, I absolutely do that. And we'll do it in any environment. And honestly, at any cost, because these are things that I feel like we have to be able to stand up against. So I agree with you. I do agree with you. So that being said, we're going to hold that right there so I can introduce our guests.
Oh, wait. Let's set some, like,
okay, do your thing. You got
a baseline. Okay.
You got it.
So, I mean, so I saw Sarah's comment earlier. It made me think of, by the way, a question that was asked on Facebook of my friends group. If the Supreme Court has never had to decide your rights, you probably have privilege. Like, wow, just to put out there, like, bam, wow, I don't know of any Supreme Court cases having to do with me that affected my rights. All right. So I want to call, like, our we've got folks watching. I want to ask them, invite you into this space with us in a way that is constructive. And what I'm asking for there is, how are we going to be with each other? Tim and I are not going to agree on this stuff, and I just want to put that out there. And that's. But we're also not going to debate it. That this is not Fox News. This is not a TV show where we're setting up straw men to have stupid conversations so we can yell and rally behind a flag. That the point of this is to practice being in relationship and practice a heart space. I also, because I have a tendency to compromise, because I have a need to be liked, I also have to remind myself that silence is violence, but also how we say no to things matters. So I want to invite our guests into that. Please don't trash people in our comments. Like, that's not what we're here for. Let's be constructive and curious with each other, and go heart first into this space, which is, I think, the most rebellious thing we can do at this point.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Like, coming together in a non-toxic, non-weaponized space is the antithesis of everything that's happening right now. I mean, I've said it before in the show, the amount of people that I know that are upset that I've created this space is amazing to me. But it's all good.
Well, and to be clear, like, why are you having these conversations with a white guy every week?
Because I think dialogue is important. I fundamentally believe that relationships are the currency of life, right? And in believing that, the only way that we are going to be able to overcome things are to really be able to sit down. Well, first we have to understand how we're showing up. And that's the healing conversation. That can be triggering for some people, because let's be candid, a lot of us have a lot of trauma, adverse childhood experiences, PTSD, whatever the term is around it, that we have not addressed. And I think we're going to talk about some of this, right? And how we kind of receive things. And then as we're in a space in which we're growing and we're healing, that opens us up to be able to actually hear other people, because we're all showing up with things that bring us to this certain point, right? And then we also got to understand that it's the collective that makes and creates this system that we buy into, whether it's economically, whether it's racism, whether it's gender, or even the positive parts of it, whether it's sports. So I'm always conscious of what's my role.
That's the challenge, because media, people want to say, you know, well, media and gun violence, media makes us do more violence, right? The challenge with those things is they are both reflective and influential.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
They both have influence on our behavior, and they're influenced by our behavior.
Yes. And that's why I'm very conscious about what I forward. Like, you know, rarely, if at all, will I forward some toxic message, some video that's, you know, if it's not breathing life or attempting to breathe life, then I don't want to be associated with me. It's just that simple. But what's so funny is that is so triggering for people right now. But whatever, that's a whole nother conversation. We got to bring our guests on.
We do.
No, I'm excited, man. I'm excited. And here's why. Because the person we're about to bring on was one of the most organic, heartfelt relationships that was established. It basically came from when I was in Florida. I walked into a UPS store, which he owns, and we just started having a conversation about people, about politics, about what was going on. And it was organic. It was open. There was a lot of candor that was there. But we did have differing, you know, backgrounds and different ways in which we saw it. But it actually was the space that we're intentionally trying to create right now. We naturally just did it. And this was well over 10 years ago. And we've kept the relationship going virtually when I lived overseas in Africa and China, when I was in parts of Europe. And so it's just circled back. And he's listened to the show. He's been a supporter, but he's also said, hey, you know, here's some things that I don't necessarily agree with, or I'm not aligned with. And we've been able to talk about it. So I'm like, listen, man, I would love to have you come on. Let's hold the space. You're an amazing person. And I think everybody should hear what you have to say. So with all that being said, you know, also, you know, from a framing standpoint, he's a U.S. veteran, being a part of the Marine Corps. He's actually run for political office and political positions, and running for Hillsborough County Commissioner in Florida, but then also at some point actually running for Senate. So he's involved and he's engaged. So all of that being said, I would like to invite everyone to our guest, Mr. Tim Curtis. Tim, how are you doing, sir?
Loving life, living large. I'm highly favored.
You're looking good, man. How you feeling?
Torian, I'm living the dream. I am very, very blessed, very fortunate. I love what I do. I love coming to work. And one of the reasons why I love coming to work is because I get to meet great people like Torian Richardson. And as a result of that, now I've been able to meet Royce. So I'm very, very fortunate, happy to be here. You know, you talked about courage. And I got to tell you, for all of the things that I've done for the 20 years I spent in the Marine Corps and all of the other things I've done in my life, you guys may not be able to tell, but I'm nervous. I'm shaking. I don't know about all that courage here.
Listen, man, no reason to be nervous. No reason to be nervous. Go ahead.
Let's let the listeners in on the joke. We started a prep process and we ended up truncated. We didn't get everything done, so we left Tim with the question. Tell us about a time when you were courageous, and it was nuts because immediately he's like, you know, he immediately like went to not the Marines and like not running for Congress. Like it's not those things. It was family, or like he just acknowledged like that. One of the things I enjoy about this space is that it is kind of a hybrid space. But for those of us who hang out a lot in white spaces, this space is not going to feel exactly comfortable. So just to say, yeah, Tim, I'm with you. Just for the record, I get nervous every week. I'm with you, man.
I appreciate that, and I'm excited about being able to talk about you know, after the show, I guess it was 2 weeks ago or last week, and I called Torian and I said, I need some help. But and Royce, what you just said right now reminds me of why it was okay for me 10 years ago to have that enter into that conversation with Torian. I work, the places where I am, I'm in a very diverse community, very, very diverse. As a matter of fact, at my other store, which is in a heavily populated Latino community, folks will come in the door and they'll look at my graphic artist and they'll say to her, "¿Te habla español?" And she will turn around to them and say, "No, go talk to the white guy. He speaks more Spanish than I do." So I'm able to, I've had the privilege for 20 years now of being able to work in communities that are very, very diverse. And so while all of that gives me great courage, I'm still nervous being in this space right here, but you guys help. So I appreciate that.
It's all love, man. It's all love. So you use a very interesting word that I really want to dig into a little bit. You said privilege. What are your thoughts around privilege, specifically white privilege? What do you think?
So, and now having listened to the lead-in and the earlier comment that said that white privilege is a myth, I'm still ruminating on that. But I'll tell you, I'm absolutely solid on this. Does privilege exist? Absolutely. Privilege certainly does exist. I don't know that I'm of the opinion, well, this much I know for sure. If I have benefited from white privilege, they kept it a secret from me. I've worked very hard. But you know what? Forget the working part of it. Let's go to the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
And the heart of the matter is this. I only care about your heart. And I don't care if you are melanin challenged like I am, or if you are melanin blessed like my brother Torian. And that's not an original thought on my part. I was listening to a pastor by the name of Vodi Bakum. Vodi Bakum, I believe is his name. He got up and he said, "Listen, I don't want y'all to be upset with me, and I don't want you to be upset with Jesus just because he blessed me with more melanin that he blessed you with." And his point was, and Royce, this goes to something you were talking about as far as science is concerned, because that's science. That's a fact. We all have melanin in our DNA. It's just a matter of how much do we have or do we not have. So, but to the point specifically about white privilege, there are certainly privileged people in this country and in this world, and many of them, some of them, whatever number it is of them, are white. But privilege is not limited to white.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's one of the most important things to center on there, is that privilege shifts and changes in different settings.
Yeah, but I got to keep you guys honest though. We're specifically talking about white privilege on this one, right? And how, because we've had this conversation off air, how and or if that has created the structure in Western capitalism and how we actually operate, how that affects certain groups differently because that is ingrained and baked into the system. If you believe that, some people don't. I do. Some people don't.
If I could share this quick thought with you, so you all were very kind in mentioning my 20 years in the Marine Corps. So while I was in the Marine Corps, I was also able to complete my undergrad studies. So at the age of 38, I was able to retire. So here I am, white guy, 20 years on the job, excellent training, a college degree, and really entering my prime productive years. I'll tell you that I sent out, I'm sure it had to have been 500 resumes. And not only did I not get hired, white guy, experience, credentials, education, not only did I not get hired, folks, I didn't even get an interview. I didn't even get an interview.
Two years for me in Albuquerque. I swore I'd never own my own business again. And what did I have to do? I had to start my own fucking business because I couldn't get. but and let's be clear here. There's a couple of things that you just said. Privilege for most of us is not absolute. I use the example all the time of, Tim, if you or I said I can grab women by the pussy anytime that I want, I won't get elected president, right? And yet somebody did that and did get elected president. So I think it's important to distinguish that there are folks with pretty much absolute privilege. So yes, privilege is a spectrum. Most of us with privilege, we don't know that we have it. We don't ask for it. We don't earn it, want it. And yet it exists. I think that was the thing that shocked me when I was having those conversations, like literally on food stamps, literally on government assistance, working 6 jobs, trying to put food on the table for my family. And somebody was sitting there saying, well, you still have white privilege. And I'm like, you can't possibly have it. Like, look at this, So how do we know it exists? Just because I'm being the antagonist. Okay. Just because one person got elected doesn't necessarily mean that there's universally white privilege for absolutely
white people, specifically, if we want to be candid, what a lot of people believe, heterosexual white males.
So somebody, I'm sure one of our listeners, I don't remember the name of the study, but there was a study that was done back in the 60s or 70s and then replicated about 10 or 15 years ago that handed children dolls on video. And this was the most heartbreaking thing to watch, and asked them different questions. Which one would like to play ball? Which one would like to do these different things? And one of the questions that they asked was, which of these is a good baby? And they had 2 different babies here, and one was a white baby and one looked like a black baby, little dolls. And the children would pick up the white baby and say, this one. And they would say, show me how you hold this baby, and things like this. So they were exploring all these things. And like to a child, whether they were black children, white children, Latino children, they would pick up the white child with love. And the one that broke my heart was watching this, and these were like, I don't know, 6 or 5-year-old children.
Okay.
This I would describe her as a young African-American girl, like 6 years old, said, which one's the good one? She picks up the white baby, show us how you hold it. And she holds it just lovingly and sets it back down. And then the person asks, which one looks more like you? And the child reaches over. Yes, the significance of the doll test. There it is. She reaches over to the white child, like she wants to be the white child. And then she reaches over and she picks up the black baby doll by the foot and holds it up, looks away from it and says, this one. Like, if there's any better example of how entrenched white privilege is, that video just blows the whole thing open. And it was replicated. The scary part, it was replicated and it had the same damn results, like this century. So, I mean, I guess I'm more interested in, what do you get out of believing that you don't have white privilege or that it doesn't exist? Like, how does that benefit you?
Right. Well, Royce, great question. And I'm gonna think just for a moment. I'm gonna stumble around, and I'm gonna say first and foremost that it doesn't benefit me for white privilege to not exist. I don't look at it as a win or a loss that white privilege does or does not exist. Part of that, I'm going to ascribe to my heart.
Okay.
And just simply say that I have no interest in denigrating, in subjugating, in putting down, in winning over somebody else based on their gender, their skin color. there's nothing in that for me. I will say this, and I'm going to share a quick story with you that hopefully will illustrate some of my growth, because Torian talked about moving to a space from wherever he was to where he is now. And much of this has to do with, and I'm going to use the word here, and I hope people will hear it for what it's intended in, and not take it in a negative manner, but it's based on ignorance. And when I say ignorance, I mean a lack of knowledge. I don't mean not intelligent. I mean a lack of information, a lack of knowledge. I'll tell you this story very quickly. Again, it happens every day in my UPS store. It's one of the reasons why I love to come to work. My wife doesn't understand why I love to go to work, but I love to go to work. It's such a rewarding experience. So this mother walks in with her daughter, and her daughter clearly has Downs. And in any other situation, I would have been going 100 miles an hour, but it was just the two of them and I. And so I took a moment, and I kneeled down, and I looked this little girl in the eye, and I said, "Hi, how are you today?" She and I had an amazing conversation. And at the end of that conversation, I said to myself, "Hey, Tim, take the blinders off, boy. Take the blinders off." So it had nothing in the world to do with the color of her skin, but it was a matter of a lack of information on my part. And so the result of that was I started doing some more reading, and learned a little bit more about people, about children with Downs. And the same is somewhat true as I learned that I was born in the month of February. Frederick Douglass was born in the month of February. Well, at least in the end, he said he was. He wasn't really sure, but he claimed February as his birth month. And so Frederick Douglass and I share that much in common. Well, I was reintroduced to Frederick Douglass by a friend of mine. And so I've taken some time to read and learn more about Black history in particular. And the result of that is a shedding of some of my ignorance. And that's really what it takes to move us from people in the streets. That's the difference between people, in my opinion, people in the streets protesting and people in the streets rioting.
So
information.
So a few comments around that. So I think that self-awareness and self-growth is at the core of a lot of things, probably most things in life. But the antagonist part of this conversation would be, the way I would frame what you just said, Tim, was you're seeing things from a relationship level and as a person who is highly self-aware. And I love that term, you're shedding your own ignorance. But I would also argue that there are a lot of people who don't want to shed their ignorance, and they don't even feel a need to do so. Maybe they're not working in a culturally diverse area or background, or maybe they don't have relationships. Because, you know, when you play on teams or when you're in the military and you actually go through things with people, your relationship becomes less cursory. It's probably the best way to say it, because you have a foundation of rooted experience that you can pull from outside of the cursory things. But there are a lot of people, I would argue millions, that have not had that experience. They've done well, and they will say, listen, white privilege doesn't exist. And they can point out a few things as opposed to where it doesn't exist. But then if you reflect back in their life, because I always ask people, you know, who are you around the most? Now, we start with the cursory, because I believe in diversity of thought, diversity of experience, but it's very difficult, if not impossible, to do that if the only people that Torian happens to hang out with are heterosexual African-American men from the south side of Chicago that were in Auburn Gresham that moved to the Aurora Naperville area like me. And that is the majority, I can't say majority, a large population, particularly in the United States. And so that's why I would say that from a relationship standpoint, yes, I think that you can bridge that gap and you can dig tunnels where people can actually connect. But I'm looking at it more from the system, specifically economics that we're in. Is it baked in? I would say yes.
I mean, facts say it is, and I mean, I want to acknowledge some of the things that Tim, that you're saying, that just because we have privilege doesn't mean we're bad people. Yeah, like let's be really clear. That's not what we're dealing with there. What we're dealing with is, so how do we become anti-racist? How I mean, in this one, it is bluntly, how do we become anti-racist? And there's actually there's a book that I'm going to be reading at the end of this month on my podcast with a friend around that one. Actually with TL, I mentioned TL earlier, the Frontline Stereo podcast. I think he and I are reading that one. But one of the things I assert is that those of us with male privilege, with white privilege, with hetero privilege, like all of those kinds of things, I always include myself in that. I'm more of on the pansexual or bisexual end of things. So, but I'm married to a woman, so I pass. But when we look at these things, I go a step further, because it's not just for me about how do we deal with privilege. It's how do you and I, Tim, how do we claim what our whiteness, what the whiteness of our society, or the whiteness that our society projects onto us. Because I mean, my mom's family, the German family, they were not white at one point either in this country. You know, that's how privilege has worked throughout the history of this country, is that it's shifted, and different groups have been on the outs at different times. But for me, the question is, what is my whiteness cutting me off from? What part of myself do I not have access to because of my whiteness?
So, Royce, when you say that, though,
yeah,
when you talk about whiteness, are you talking about melanin, or are you talking about something else?
Good, thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, first off, whiteness as melanin is bullshit. I'm not white, you're not black. You know, those are not our skin colors.
I'm chocolate. I'm chocolate for all those who
you know, and as you said, Tim, those of us that are not as melanin blessed, like, absolutely. And that's the lie behind it. Race is a lie, but racism is real. Like,
could I jump in right there?
Yeah.
There are some things that in order to have this conversation, we have to stipulate too. We talked about this in the pre-game.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are just some fundamentals that are non-negotiable. Any person with any intelligence who denies that there are racists and that racism exists, I can't dialogue with them, because what you said about facts. Now, some of your facts I've got a different perspective on, but there are some that are just simply non-negotiable, right? Are there evil people in the world? Are there racists in the world? Good, gracious, yes, they are. And then part of what we hope to do, I imagine, you two guys doing great work, part of what we hope to do here is to identify, maybe even be able to isolate. And for those of that group who have a desire to move out of that group, to shed their ignorance and move on to a more intelligent, informed relationship with the rest of the world, then we say welcome to those. And those that don't, we in the Marine Corps had a way to deal with them. Well, and I said that very lowly because I didn't want everyone to know.
Well, I mean, but that skirts the issue of, like, so how do those of us who acknowledge that, okay, I don't want to be a racist, and therefore I do my best to not engage in that, but it's not sufficient to simply say I don't want to be a racist, when you and I, people that look like you and I, have had the vote in this country since day one, and people that look like Torian have kind of had the vote for
a few decades.
Yeah, I mean, we could argue that their voting rights started after the Civil War, but not really, because we all know that the Jim Crow stuff was in the way. And when we're looking at voter suppression today, where we see statistically very clearly that voter and this is just along the lines of vote, but there are statistically fewer polling stations in communities of color in this country. It's a broad generalization, but it's also broadly true. So, like, again, how do we compare those two? Like,
okay, Royce, I'm going to challenge you on if we could, right there, right? We elected twice, pretty substantially, a guy that looks very much like Torian.
And his picture hangs on the wall with how many white guys?
But I'm not going to argue that, but we're talking about today, right? Again, I'm going to stipulate to, look, I would never claim that we were perfect. Not that we're perfect now. We are working toward a more perfect union. I work at that. You work at that. That's why we're doing this today. It's what I've done in an organization that I helped co-found about 11 years ago, where we do civics and civics education, and we talk about these very issues. And so, not there yet. We've done great work. There's still plenty of work to be done. There are hearts to win, and when we win their hearts, we'll have a chance to change their minds. But this is one of those areas, Royce, where maybe you and I aren't going to agree, because when someone says that America is just deadbeat racist, I look at the previous administration and I say, gracious sakes, 13 to 14% of the population, had they voted in 100% solidarity, they would not have had sufficient number of votes to make Barack Obama the president. So it's difficult for me to accept that we are just flat out racist. That's why I said earlier, are there racists? Oh, absolutely. Is there racism? Absolutely. And I will stand shoulder to shoulder with you, lock arms with you in Torian, and I will march through a hail of bullets to tear down those institutions. When somebody points them out to me, I will work diligently, tirelessly to put an end to that.
Chris, I got a comment. I've marched. I've been to 3 during the current situation, but I'm not. I am actually more of an advocate for economic empowerment than I am social justice, because I understand. My understanding of the United States is that it was fundamentally founded on economics, prosperity, right? Some would even argue greed, and I would say there's some levels of that too, because of the economic disparity that we actually see in this country. So for me, what I need my white brothers, like you all, my F3 brothers, and people that I know and that I love and that I care about, to be able to do is to actually be actionable in what they say they actually believe. And I'm not saying that you all aren't. I'm just saying this is the conversation that I have. So for me, the way I try to show up, and I want to be held accountable on when it comes from a gender standpoint, is when I'm seeing things that are overtly or covertly wrong that are happening to women, that I am not only calling it out, but I'm doing things to thwart that. When something happens in the Black community, then I'm supporting that. When something happens in the LGBTQ community or ageism, right? So to me, it's about action. Everything is about action. So I don't want to be a passive person, because Torian is not a passive person for himself. I want to be generative and project that out. Now, that
how
also
we do that without white knighting is another conversation we got to have at some point. But anyway, yeah.
What is white knighting? I feel like I should know that, but I'm not.
No, well, running in to save somebody.
Oh, I got you.
Right.
Well, yeah, I've and this may be my own personality.
I thought you were with white privilege there, that white knighting thing.
Well, I mean, again, the Black Knight's bad, the white knight's good.
Well, but the knighting, that's masculinity. That's the paternity part, right? And so I'm very conscious of that.
That stuff's all in there. Like, you can't separate these things.
But that's what I'm saying, is that it's baked in. So when I'm in an environment, that's why this show is so near and dear to me, because when I talk to a lot of people, some of my male friends will be like, dude, men talking about their feelings, you're writing a book around courageous vulnerability. I'm like, absolutely, because I've had privileges, because I am a heterosexual man. I have a certain physique. I played sports at a certain level, and just right there, I've been able to plug into certain situations personally and professionally, and I acknowledge it, and I was born into it, but that also means that I have to be active in creating space like this in my relationships and actually trying to neutralize it. That's how I want to show up, and that's what I want from anybody else who's anti those things.
That right there, I think, is the key. Is how do we first off, do we acknowledge that we have privilege, and second off, what do we do with it? Because that, and then so to kind of return, by the way, Tim, to. So my argument is actually that people like you and I, Tim, we have to see what we have to gain from the end of a system of privilege. To do that, we have to ask the question: are we privileged? And I think there's the first question. Do you have privilege?
Wait, let's answer that question. So, Tim, do you think that you have privilege in the system as a white man? Royce, do you think that you have privilege in the system as a white man?
So, do I have privilege as a man? Yes, I do. Do I have privilege as a Caucasian? In certain circumstances, I absolutely do. Do I have white privilege? If you're going to conflate those two, then I guess I would have to say yes. And I would. Okay, I'll answer that question, then we'll get to the second part of it.
Well, actually, what's different for you there? Like, because I think you're actually teasing something out that's really important. So go with that. What's the difference between
Caucasian and white?
Yes, I have Caucasian and white.
Oh, just another term. There was nothing else behind that.
Okay.
Because I mean,
a white guy, Caucasian.
I mean, one of the things.
Even that's kind of funny to me, because the Caucasus are over in Eastern Europe somewhere, and I've been to the Far East, I've been to the Near East, I've never been to Europe yet.
I have.
Yeah.
Lithuania, Romania.
I'm going to carry your bags for you on your next trip.
No, that's all good, man. I don't need to carry my bag. We go together. We carry each other's bags. How about that?
There you go. I love
it.
Golly, and that train left the track because there was a follow-up thought. But again, right? My heart says, "Oh, why is my battery running low? I'm plugged in. Maybe I'm not." Guys, give me just one moment. Let me plug this thing in.
No problem. Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
Oh, so I mean, one of the challenges there really is the notion of whiteness itself is a lie, right? Because it's not an identity that I would want. It's not one I ever wanted to claim. It's something that gets projected on us when we walk in a room. Right?
But you still have it though. You have it.
Yes. And that for me, I don't know about you, Tim. This for me was the sticking point when I was wrestling with this at first, is well, I don't want it and I don't claim it. And it's not actually there with my family. My family is this weird mix of people. How can I, be white? And yet it's over and over, it had to be explained to me because I'm stubborn, that it doesn't matter, because when I walk in the room, it's how other people see me, and they look at me and say, that's a white guy. And that's from part of our brain, that's way back there, that existed back when we were just those proto-humans on the savannah. So we have to constantly accommodate it and overcome it. So that's an issue that we have to deal with.
Go ahead, Tim. I can see in your face that you want to comment to that.
Right. So this may be why, Torian, I made that phone call to you and I said, hey, I feel guilty about not feeling guilty. Because, Royce, to your point about people projecting, right? Yep. You didn't ask to be white. You didn't ask to be male. You didn't ask. I didn't ask for any of this. And for anything that I've enjoyed, I've worked for, and I've shared. But that's another tangent. But what I can't do, what I have no control over, it's like trying to prove a negative. What I cannot do is I can't control what Royce or Torian thinks of me when I enter a room.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
The challenge is that
on initial impression, right?
But the challenge is that the system is built around the fact that people do that, and the system feeds us a narrative. That was Torian's point, I think, about narrative. Feeds us a narrative about whiteness being good and the darker our skin color is, gradually worse and worse. And when you have that narrative, it impacts the way people see us. And so we are deeply responsible as white men to how we deal with that. That's why simply not being racist is insufficient today, that anti-racist is what we have to be doing.
It was never.
It isn't our choice. Yeah, you know what?
Never sufficient.
Point. Absolutely. Well said.
Right. And if I could, and let's go all the way back to it was never sufficient, right? Let's go all the way back to one of the areas where I have trouble understanding folks that say, well, America has always been, will always be a racist nation. It was founded on racism, et cetera, et cetera. But and I'm going to reference Frederick Douglass again when he talked about the 3/5 clause. And for those of us who have done the studies, on the cutting floor in Jefferson's workroom when he was writing the Constitution was that portion that outlawed slavery. Now, the horrible compromise was the 3/5 clause, but that was the death knell of slavery as an institution. Slavery and racism, not the same thing.
Okay, time out. What's the difference? What's the difference?
Thank you, and I'd be happy to tackle that one, right? Because racism is a heart and a head issue. Slavery is an institutional issue. When people say today institutional racism, and I don't doubt that it exists somewhere, and when I learn of it, I do what I can to I'm in the anti stuff is another thing that I struggle with. I am proactive in trying to point it out and eliminate it.
Okay, that's fair.
But the difference is an institution versus a head and a heart issue. And that's why I love what you guys are doing here, especially with the name of the show. Where's your heart? Because I'll go back to, and this is based off of my personal belief system as a believer in Christ. When we can win the hearts, we can mold the minds. And until people see each other, when you walk into a room somewhere, when I don't see you as black, white, male, female, short, tall, fat, skinny,
then I have to say this. How are the millions of hearts who are protesting right now, endangering their own lives to go protest amidst a COVID panic? How are you not hearing their hearts, that they have experienced institutional racism, that their life is in danger every day to the point that they're like, it doesn't matter if I get this damn disease because I'm dead anyway. Like I'm trying not to be, because I want to. That's a heart question, man. Like, how do you hear their hearts?
Right. So for those who,
because they're testifying to something, man. They're testifying that this system has fucked them. And how can we not hear that? How do we not listen to that? These are millions upon millions of people.
I can tell you how.
Well, no, I mean, and I'm
go ahead.
I want Tim to have the space to respond to, because I'm blabbing a lot.
No, I do hear, and all I can tell you is in my corpus of belief and in my circles, which actually in my world, as a result of many of the things that I've been able to experience and that I'm involved in, I have a pretty wide circle and quite diverse. So when I hear it and when I see it, like Torian, I actually, and you guys asked me earlier about doing something courageous. I guess I hadn't occurred to me as being courageous at the time. It just seemed like the right thing to do, to go, whoa, whoa, what are you talking about? That's a really unintelligent thing for you to say, for you to think. What about? And then the conversation goes. So, Royce, I hear them. And here in Hillsborough County, I hear them. But one of the other things that I hear is, we're in this together, except that, and this is something that's happened firsthand. Wait, you're a white guy. You couldn't possibly understand.
Yeah. And okay, we have to be able to stand in that space and say, yes, I don't understand what it's like to get pulled over if I was melanin blessed like Torian. I don't understand that. I'm going
to trademark that term, by the way.
Yeah. So here's one of the challenges that I put out to people right now, and it's a challenge I'm doing my best to tackle. Is my goal is to sit in spaces where I am a minority in the room. So, like I mention my women's studies classes all the time. Spaces where I have to shut the fuck up, where my job is to step back and just, like, I'm the only dude in the room, so I want to listen. And I love doing that in black spaces as well, where I listen more than I talk, and I'm just curious. And what I started doing was realizing that those are the spaces where I get to discover the parts of me that my whiteness has cut off. The parts of me that because they got cut off years ago when I was told, you can't behave like those people. And it's these little subtle passive aggressive things that are done to us all through our lives, that cut us off from parts of ourselves, that I really like. I think that's, to me, Tim, honestly, is the answer to that question for me, is because I have to be in those spaces enough to know what's at stake for me. Why am I marching? Because I want to march and be a good ally, but I know that I'm marching because, for me, when I'm in those spaces where I'm a minority, I get to see parts of myself that I don't get to see when I'm in my white boy circles.
And it's interesting that you say that. So I'm trying to relate this back to me, and I've pretty much been a minority my whole life, not necessarily just with racism or my race. Yeah. But when I think about, I grew up in 3 different neighborhoods. So, my family is from south side of Chicago. I spent a lot of time Auburn, Gresham area, and being in a minority there was more of, I lived in the suburbs part of that time too. So in those environments, sometimes it was like, oh, well, you're not really black enough, or you're not really from here, or you're not from the hood, or whatever. I mean, these are words that were said to me, not saying I necessarily believe that. And then in the western suburbs of Chicago, I was a minority physically, right, or visually, but then economically, right, because I went to the last few years of high school in an area that was fairly affluent, but we didn't have that level of affluence. So for me, I've never really been in hey, I'm the majority, except for, and this is really interesting, when I got into business and it was all men. And I was like, okay, this feels kind of good. Like, I can say stuff and I can do certain things, and I'm going to certain places and I'm doing, and I started to notice, yeah, I may be one of a few black people that are there, but it certainly is all men that's here. And that was when I was like, this is what it feels like, but then this is also why it's so important for me to make sure that I'm not only anti, but I'm actually advocating, because for the majority of my life, I've never felt like I fit in. But here's the thing though, I've always felt as if I was an empowered person, because physically and I'm not trying to say this from a ego or a cocky standpoint, but I'm not physically intimidated, right? Intellectually, I'm able to listen, but I also know how to pull that sword out if I need to. And so I never felt threatened. My life wasn't threatened. And so when I see Native Black Americans right now who are protesting and a part of feeling that oppression, I also understand that maybe some of us, or some of them, don't have that sword and they don't feel empowered in the way that they should. And that's where I start to gravitate toward, how does the system actually work? And so when we just think about what we see growing up, I mean, Muhammad Ali had a great video about this. Why is it that the majority of people that we see are Caucasian? I'm not saying it's a bad or a good thing. It is a observation, and it's something that we have to actually ask. Why is it that when we do see more people of color, or Asians, because there are not a lot of Asians or Chinese people that are on television right now, right? So when I see them, there was a show that I lived in China for 4 years, so I saw a show that was based on Asians. I think it was Chinese from Hong Kong, and I was like, wow, I've never seen a sitcom in the United States that had Chinese people as the main character, and I thought it was great. But it's that, and Tim, you talked about it. It's that heightened sense of awareness, or you said shedding the ignorance, which I'm going to quote you on because I think that's a great way to say it. No, seriously, because people have to say, I want to shed the ignorance. The problem is when you've benefited so much financially, socially, maybe even politically. I'm not really into politics in that way. It's very hard to shed the ignorance when you passively benefited from it.
And I think it's also important to note that shedding the ignorance is painful. Like personal growth is fundamentally painful because of the way the brain works, because it hurts to grow that way. I often talk about it as like it's similar to building muscle. You know, when you lift, you get to that point where you feel the pump and you know you're going to be sore. Like that's the same way when we're learning, and that's why a lot of us we stopped doing it. When I went back to school last fall, it had been a while since I was in a classroom, and it was that all over again. I had to go through that again of the pain of just being like, shit, I'm learning again, and this hurts. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons to not go through it. It sucks.
But while it, and I have to get back in the gym because I just realized that, well, because, and this is the worst reason in the world for me to have to go to the gym, but I just realized because I bought a Doppler radar device, and I found out that my golf swing is 10 miles an hour slower than what I thought it was. And so I got to go to the gym so I can fix that. But Royce, to your point about about shedding the ignorance, I guess there is a pain associated with that. There certainly is a pain associated with going to the gym, which is why I've religiously stayed away for so long. But
that's a good analogy, though.
But there is just such great benefit. 10 miles an hour on a golf swing. More importantly, I get to be in relationship with guys like Torian, Richardson, and Royce. Right? When you shed the ignorance, whatever the pain associated with that is nothing. That is nothing compared to the joy, to the benefit, personally benefit, but then to the rest of the world. Good gracious. The fact that I can converse with the Latinos that walk in here and I see their face light up when I greet them in their native tongue and I ask them how I can help them in their native tongue. I mean, to watch them light up. You talked about, I think in the pregame show about the dopamine hits. I'm like, baby, oh, here we go. This will be a lot of fun. Right? So, but it's painful learning Spanish.
Yep.
If you look like this, except that I was in love with my 7th grade Spanish teacher, and so that
helps.
That helped grease the skids a little bit. But then again, and this gets to my point for my phone call to Torian earlier about not feeling guilty about feeling guilty about not feeling guilty, because I have benefited. I saw an opportunity and I took advantage of it. Did I benefit? You could define that as a benefit. But in my 20 years in the Marine Corps, when I got to a point where I had Marines that were working for me, most of whom did not look like me. They were Latino, Mexican, Texican, Puerto New Yorkian. I asked them, when you come to see me and you give me something to do, would you please say it to me in Spanish? And then point to it. So they would walk in and they need me to sign something, and young Corporal Rendon would say to me, she would say, "Señor, su firma aquí, por favor." You want me to sign here. So the point is, you know, you take advantage of an opportunity, and if you take advantage of, then you benefit from. So if you benefit from, that kind of extends into you are now privileged as a result of. Some privilege exists, no doubt. Some privilege exists because we create it. And I don't mean that in a negative manner that we create it. There is an opportunity. It presents itself, whether it's brought to us or whether we help create it. There's an opportunity that exists. You make the most of it. You benefit from it. By definition, you are then privileged as a result of it.
But the challenge with that system, though, is that it doesn't account for what crosses your table is going to be different than what even crosses Torian's table. Like, and that's part of the system that I think we have to address.
I absolutely, and Royce, I will stand again shoulder to shoulder with you to make sure that that exists, because I'm going to go back to, and Torian talked about this briefly, about the economics of it.
I'm leaning in for this one.
That's another one of my favorite pastors, what he says, lean in for this one, lean in close. One of my favorite authors, and the guy that I spend much time listening to as I'm driving, because I would never watch YouTube while I'm driving. I'm a safe driver. I would never do such a thing. Is Dr. Thomas Sowell. And Dr. Thomas Sowell has written just volume after volume after volume. He and Dr. Walter Williams, and they talk about the economics of this. And I will work to the death to make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity, that barriers are destroyed, knocked down, taken away, so that everyone has equal opportunity. But given equal opportunity, look, I had as much opportunity to play in the NBA as Michael Jordan did. I just didn't have the talent.
That's fair. That's fair.
No, it's not. It's not talent. It's skill. But I mean, even that right there, like that right there has been shown to be one of the more racist tropes in our country, because when we look at, because people with our melanation, Tim, have other opportunities to gain economic advantage, it's not as beneficial to us to spend the time on the court playing. And so when somebody does, I mean, right now, part of the reason we're seeing so many protests is because so many people are out of work. And I mean, that's just blunt. Like, that's part of what's going on. You know, so economic opportunity is a big thing there, but even in there, we can see the racism.
Okay, so what? Here's. We're gonna, because it's long, right? And we want everybody to tune in, and we want to keep everybody's attention. We're gonna finish this. I have a few comments on this. So the way I see it is,
before you do, if I could just say,
go ahead.
Now, I've tuned in a couple times, and you guys do this at the end of every show. Now, we went a little bit long. We went.
Hey, you know how it happens.
I know. We like to talk, bro. We're like 30 minutes over, but we're gonna continue our conversation, though.
Well, to be clear, folks, we're going to work on I think we're going to go with Patreon. Is that what we decided?
Yes.
Yeah.
Patreon. So
we're about to go to an after show and kind of tear it up a little more when Tim and I are less nervous. But so that content will be going on our Patreon. So please check that stuff out. So here's what I'd love to close with. Can we do this time? Is what's number one, something you're going to read that is way outside your comfort zone on whiteness or anti-racism or something like that? And what's a concrete action that you're going to take in the next week? And I'm asking this going, shit, I don't have answers for this yet. So who wants to go first?
I will.
Okay, go, Tim.
So there's a book that I've been hearing about recently, written by Thurgood Marshall. And it has to do with what took place here in the state of Florida. And my good buddy Ira has posted on his Facebook the title of the book, and I don't recall what it is right now. But I'm going to go get that book, and it talks about very specific, very horrible racism that took place here in the state of Florida. And I want to learn the history of that specific incident. And what action am I going to take? Royce, that one's a little more difficult for me to pinpoint, because, and this is going to, to some people anyway, this may sound really crappy.
We're never going to make everybody happy, man. It's okay.
Yeah. But Royce, I tell you this from the bottom of my heart. Every day I look for an opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. I don't see my good brother Torian as a melanin blessed individual, and you as a less melanin blessed individual. It's part of. I think that's part of what my my struggle is, because I don't assign color. I see another human being, and until you give me reason to not like you, man, I love you. But a lot of people give me a lot of reason not to like them, and they do it pretty quick sometimes. But anyway, so my answer to your question is, I look for opportunities every day to try to make a difference in someone's life, because I'm completely selfish. And here's probably the final thing I'm going to say. This is completely selfish. I get so much joy out of doing good for others that it's completely selfish. You think I'm doing this because I want to make you happy? You're wrong. I'm doing it because I want to make me happy. But the only way I can make me happy is to make you happy.
So the book is called Devil in the Groove. TL.
Yes.
TL.
TL coming through.
Always. Go Miles.
So I do want to. We're going to pick up on the color blindness thing in the after show. Yeah, we got to talk about that. But okay, so what was the question? Concrete action and book. I'm gonna. Well, I mean, I kind of cheated already on that one, because I'm going to read How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. It's over there on my wall later this month. I'm looking forward to that one. That one's going to be rough. Concrete action. I do a lot of role-playing games, like tabletop role-playing games, and well, hell, even my online stuff with World of Warcraft, stuff like that. Those spaces are pretty damn whitewashed, and so that's the concrete action I've been taking, is trying to reach out to my friends who are also people of color and saying, I got a game for you. I think I'm in 4. I counted it a week ago. I was in 4 different games right now, game sessions with Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. 20 people in between all those groups, and at the time there was only one person of color. One of my groups has since said, yeah, we got to fix this, and now there's 2 people of color in those 20 people, which is still fucking ridiculous. But so I'm working on trying to get those spaces to be more of a reflection of the world I want to be in.
I like that.
But well, but again, that's privilege, man, because I get to use this power to say, I need more people that have different things than I have at the table when we do this.
Royce,
yeah.
Royce, why don't you challenge some of your friends to clean their wives' toilets?
I do that too.
real men clean toilets.
I cleaned it this morning for both of my parents. That's true. So let me finish up before we start the
after show.
Start the after show. What I would say to people is, don't call yourself a leader if you are not trying to change systems. There isn't a CEO on the face of this planet who makes decisions based on their immediate family for the larger organization. So if people are calling themselves leaders, whether it's in the military or whether it's in business, large business, your goal is to be able to create the environment that other people want to opt into. The question is, who are those other people? And so call yourself a sole proprietor. And if you say, listen, I'm a sole proprietor, I'm against racism, and it's just about, immediately what's around me, I'm cool with that. The challenge that I have is, I know a lot of people who call themselves leaders, but then when it's time to address something like this, it's like, well, I'm doing the best I can with what's around me. And I call bullshit on that, right? Because I do feel that Torian Richardson is a leader, and therefore, if there's something that I don't agree with, whether it be the organization of Black Lives Matter, which I don't really understand, therefore I'm not going to wear their shirt. I'm putting that out there, right? But I know for a fact that Black Lives Matter, because I'm Black, my life has always mattered, and I've always advocated for that. Then what I'm going to do is create the environment that's going to be the antithesis, and it's going to create the world that I want to be in. And that's what the show is all about. That's what my relationships are about, but it's about changing the system where it scales beyond what's immediately around me. So that's what I would like more people to do for the sake of this conversation. If you are white or you identify as white or Caucasian, that's what I asked you to do. Become more self-aware, as you said. I like the way that shedding your own ignorance and actually trying to take actionable steps that are beyond your immediate world. And I know for a fact, I feel that if more people really did that, then we could have more organic conversations like this. Because honestly, this is where it starts. And I know that's triggering for a lot of people, but it is where it starts. Because we're going to go back, we're going to reflect on this. People who are watching are going to reflect on it. And like we said on the pre-show, there could be just one thing that helps to calibrate how somebody is showing up that becomes exponential. And that's what I want. And we have the power to do it.
I want to tag off on something you mentioned.
Yeah.
The challenge here is that it's not even if you claim the white identity. I actually don't claim the white identity, but I know that it is claimed for me.
Right. And
I think it's a vital bit of that.
Well, just like being male is claimed for me, right? Even though I do identify as a man, but it's claimed for me. And Tim touched on this, and we'll talk on the after show. He talked about how we can't control how people perceive our intentions, and I fundamentally believe that. I mean, I've gotten so much pushback on this show; it is unbelievable, and it hurts me. I mean, let me be candid. Like people that I care about, and I would even argue love, have been so visceral in about my blackness because I'm holding this space. And I know that it comes from a place of pain and trauma, and I get it, and I'm empathetic to it, but I'm also a human being too. And I know my intentions, and, you know, I know how I've shown up pretty much at every point in my life for the most part. And I just want to make sure that that's something that we're recognizing and acknowledging in people too. So with that, we're going to continue our conversation. For all of our listeners, for our viewers, thank you so much. We appreciate it. We're going to share it. Check us out at Where's Your Heart .live. It will be up in the next week or two, so we're gonna have everything there. Yeah, we've been working on that. That's low key, bro. Low key. Appreciate it, brother. Well, we're gonna continue the conversation. Be on the lookout for another link. And that being said, see you guys next week, the exact same time.
See y'all.
All right. So I'm gonna end the podcast.